Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Dawn Schultz, the Executive Director of the US Hemp Building Association. Under common leadership with our founder, Eric McKee, we are pleased to announce the launch of the US Hemp Building Foundation, which is a 501c3 tax-exempt charitable organization. Our formal mission statement will be to advocate and educate for the acceptance and advancement of hemp as a building material. Our purpose is education, and we will be supporting the overarching mission of the US Hemp Building Association. So welcome to our first USHBF event. We're happy to be collaborating with USHBA members, HempStone and Village Carpentry, as they make hemp history, constructing the first Hempcrete home in the state of Massachusetts. So before we begin, I would like to introduce the Director of Operations, Saba Tesfaye. Saba's been with us for a short time, but has already made a huge impact, so we're very grateful to have her on our team. Saba will be discussing in more detail the mission of the US Hemp Building Foundation.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So it's a pleasure to be here and share with you more about this newly formed foundation. So the US Hemp Building Foundation is a charitable organization formed to educate and advocate for the acceptance and advancement of hemp as a building material. The USHBF will cultivate awareness and outreach by facilitating certifications, professional development, and experiential learning. Our foundation's programs are built with inclusive pillars of development that focus on environmental, social, health, and economic equity. Being a tax-exempt charitable foundation, it's our vision to partner with organizations throughout the nation on projects that offer opportunities for inclusive workshop education. And our first fundraising campaign will go towards the development and implementation of building codes for hempcrete construction, as well as ongoing virtual learning opportunities. It's our mission to build together, with the keyword being together. And with that, on behalf of our team at the foundation, we are so happy to be hosting our inaugural event in collaboration with HempStone and Village Carpentry on this amazing project. We're so thankful for their time, efforts, and energy put into this work, and are happy to have the opportunity to hear all about it today. With that, it's my honor to introduce the host for this presentation, Jennifer Martin. She serves as a catalyst at HempStone and pioneers radical responsible architecture, focused on building performance and climate responsibility, amongst many other things. So without further ado, I turn it over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you for that warm introduction, Saba, and welcome everyone to the very first Hempcrete house in Massachusetts. My name is Jennifer Martin, and I serve as the project manager for the Hempcrete and plaster portions of this natural home. I'm thrilled to be your host today. Typically, open house construction tours are live and in person. We're appreciative that the US Hemp Building Foundation has agreed to host our Hempcrete tour and talk virtually so that we can turn the need for physical distance into an opportunity to broadcast to you wherever you are in the world. In this next hour, you'll hear from the Village Carpentry and Landscaping crew and the HempStone consulting and supply team as you witness the building amid construction. While we can't offer a live on-site tour due to internet connectivity issues, we've collated the best video and photography taken throughout the Hempcrete installation process to provide you with a solid understanding of what a Hempcrete building looks and feels like, both during construction and once installed. In the last quarter of the hour, we'll convene as a panel to address any questions you have. As we go along in the presentation, please jot down your questions in the Q&A box so I can pose them to the group. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to two companies that I've had the honor and privilege of being a part of for the last 2 years. First, Village Carpentry and Landscaping is a family-owned run business that focuses on offering affordable building solutions to their community. Pictured on site from left to right are Winter Holland, general contractor and project foreman. Winter's with us today.
Hello. I hope you can hear me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. And next is Kieran Bourgeois, equipment operator and Hempcrete mixer. Josh Ledoux, carpenter and Hempcrete packer, and Melissa Mello, natural builder and Hempcrete packer. And finally, Shelby Holland, project owner, building designer, and company owner. Shelby's also with us today. Village Carpentry sees Hempcrete as a viable, robust solution to address the carbon footprint of the built environment. As you'll see in here, Village Carpentry has found Hempcrete to be a relatively simple material to use and is cost competitive to implement. Village Carpentry and Landscaping has a rich history of creating New England vernacular buildings. Shelby and Winter's mom, Sarah Stoll, started the company 30 years ago and taught her sons the essence of building with their hands using simple tools. Together, the building family has had the privilege of working with some timber framing legends and have developed a portfolio of work in their own right, with buildings dotted all along the hill towns and valleys of Western Massachusetts. With an eye always to affordability, their primary objective is to meet the needs of their clients using the most local building materials. Next, HempStone is committed to bringing the power and potential of natural, biogenic materials to conventional construction. Tom Ross Masler is CEO, Chief Embodied Officer, and Tom's with us today.
Hello, everybody.
And I serve as catalyst, helping to bring radically responsible architecture to reality. Together, Tom and I provide consulting, construction, supply, training, and research to our clients throughout New England, offering customized consulting solutions to support broad adoption of natural materials in buildings. For Village Carpentry, we have supported Hempcrete adoption with training, supply, project oversight, and documentation, materials research, and performance testing. We're thrilled to empower Village Carpentry to utilize carbon beneficial materials throughout their above grade assemblies, adding Hempcrete, wood fiberboard, and foam-free air tightness solutions to their repertoire of cellulose, local timbers, and local finish boards. Together, we've specified a home that stores more carbon than was emitted in its above grade manufacture, processing, and construction. So let's go to the site. This home sits on 3 acres in Goshen, just one of many small rural hill towns in Western Massachusetts. This will be the home to Shelby and his wife, Donovan. The site will also become home to Village Carpentry and Landscaping's tools and equipment. The basement and future garage will serve as company shop and storage facilities. Many of Shelby and Donovan's neighbors are also in the professional trades, and the setting is peaceful yet productive. The primary view to the home is from the south, which features a walkout basement, and from the first floor, a deck will span the entire south facade. The building will be lime plastered on both the exterior and the interior faces of the Hempcrete, and the gables will be sided in cedar shingles. The eastern portion of the building has a single-story nook, which serves as a music room to hold, amongst other things, a baby grand piano passed down from Donovan's parents. Hempcrete's ability to maintain a consistent indoor humidity and temperature is very attractive to these active musicians. Moving around to the north side of the building, you'll see a simple symmetrical form. The roof is outfitted with standing seam metal in a deep red, which will complement the white plaster and the surrounding trees beautifully. The door in the right image will have a portico and will serve as the primary daily entrance. Now that you've been oriented to the site, I'll turn it over to the Village Carpentry team, who will explain the building in detail, show the process of installing Hempcrete, and share their perspectives as builders. After a second video, we'll return to this presentation and Tom will discuss some of the finer points of Hempcrete implementation from a consultant's perspective.
I gotta make sure I'm. Hey folks, this is Shelby Holland here, and this is a video I made of the house where I can show you all the different exterior details and some of the interior work that I was working on considering while I was designing this house. You'll see that there is the overhang above where we have the timber frame is actually directly connected through. And of course, this was a complicated detail to work the hemp around, but it actually turned out to not be as complicated as we thought it might. You will see in the corner that is, of course, a complication packing underneath those exterior braces, but the overhang will provide excellent rain and sun shelter down this south side of the house. The window sills that stick out are going to be where the windows sit on top so that the rain will shed out from underneath these windows, which are inset windows. As we continue around the house, you will see some repair work that we've done. There was a few places where we needed to replace some hempcrete that wasn't quite as stiff as we would have preferred. The nook interaction there up in the corner, which you can see, was a complicated problem both in formwork and in trying to figure out the flashing details. You'll get a better view of that later on in the video, but you'll see that we've got that roof flashing going up. The plaster will cover over that just briefly. Once again, as Jennifer said, you know, this house, we've tried to keep sort of a symmetrical, classic New England look to it. So we've got balanced windows of standard sizes. The roof itself is a truss roof with about a foot overhang laterally. Once again, trying to provide good rain cover and reduce splash onto the sills and the hemp, which is another reason we also have the building sticking out at least a full 18 inches out of the ground to keep organic matters away from the moisture of the ground. The exterior lights are also, which we saw one up above, is an interesting thing because every time we do form work, we have to match, we have to cut holes in the forms. In here, you'll see that the framing against the interior walls, we've given that a bit of a gap away from the walls so that when we plaster, we can make sure that the first coat of plaster squeezes in a little bit behind, and then the second coat will go on top of that and it'll make a nice looking seal. The floor system on the first floor is an exposed floor system, so we have a double floor system up above, which allows us to have the nice pine shiplap floor from below, but still have the plywood structure above. We specifically designed this building to have the braces be exposed on the inside. They are 1/2 inch set away from the face of the hempcrete, so the plaster will match nicely with the face for a flush wall. In the nook, we have an oak carrying beam supporting those rafters for the cathedral ceiling roof, and this gives us a nice open space for the living room and will hopefully create good acoustics for the music that we will plan on playing in this house. Here is where we put in the windows, and you can see that as we cut in the windows, it took away a little more material than was intended, so we have to patch in some. This is a 2-story house, so we have this central staircase, and the wood stove in this house will be located in the middle of the house, which will create plenty of heat flow around, and hopefully the hempcrete will absorb much of that and create a balanced heat system throughout the house throughout the year. We obviously had to go around some complex shapes. Here's a perfect example where we were trying to match around a corner of the overhang and around the post. And so making sure to pack in there was obviously an interesting challenge, but we managed to get in what we needed. The rest of that will be cellulose in those open bays. Just like here, you'll see that underneath this hempcrete, this is over the nook wall. We have a section that is a bit of exterior wall with flashing framing, and that's going to get cellulose as well. And that wall, amongst many, will have wood interior siding for carbon footprint reasons. Here you can see a little bit of a close-up of the joint up on the exterior of the nook, and we will be taping and trimming this for air sealing. And then here you can get a better close-up of how we flashed next to the hemp. This will get taped to the hemp and then plastered over the tape for the exterior air barrier seal layer. So there was obviously a lot of different things that we got to look at there with the braces and the timber frame and the also there was the overhangs and the nook roofs and stuff like that. And so one of the things that this project really presented as a challenge was obviously design work. So that meant that we had to, you know, I thought about this framing system quite a lot in the before we started building, and windows are a challenge, doors are a challenge. I mean, anytime you have a thick wall, it's a challenge. So, you know, this was all a project that involved a lot of talking to other designers and other builders. And we, you know, so I had to, as I'm sure many of you will probably sort of think about it, I had to talk to my wife. I had to convince her of this alternative material. I had to talk to my, you know, the building inspectors was obviously an interesting one. And in really a lot of these cases, what I sort of dealt with was I just, I sort of presented, you know, detailed designs, things like that. I made sure to talk to architects, engineers, and therefore in presenting it to both my client, my wife, and her family, as well as to the building inspectors and the other people who are going to okay or not okay the project, having all that stuff sort of pre-designed and pre-thought really helped a lot. And of course, another thing that was sort of an important thing while working on this project was to think about cost. As Jennifer mentioned, you know, affordability is really a key part of the way I, you know, think, and the way my family, you know, my mother has sort of trained me to think. And so, you know, definitely was important that we considered the cost. And overall, I would say that the cost is going to be very comparable, especially considering the performance potential of this house, to anything we would be building locally and other projects we've built locally. So really it was just a matter of, you know, getting those, crossing our T's and dotting our I's before we, you know, really tried to introduce into the insurance companies or anything like that. And then, you know, and then making sure that anything we were doing wasn't so complicated that I couldn't afford it or somebody else couldn't afford it. And so, you know, obviously after all this design work, you know, I handed the job over to my foreman. So now he's going to tell you what his experience was.
Well, yeah, this was a very interesting project for me. I have, you know, a pretty extensive background in building and in timber frame construction, but this Hempcrete was rather new to me. I went into it fairly green, having, you know, basically just getting my hands on the material only about a week before we started pouring, before this project started. And we did a few test blocks and started in on it, and really very quickly developed a pretty good workflow of the mixing, you know, figuring out the mixing and figuring out the moisture content for the mixing was one of the sort of the learning curves, but it's a very quick learning curve. You know, we very quickly, so we did a few test blocks and then started pouring, and, you know, just working with it for a few days and moving the formwork, the shuttering, and doing mixes. I very quickly developed I think a pretty good sense of kind of like how it feels, how it is to work with, and especially in this application, trying to deal with the formwork and the packing around a timber frame required some sort of creative solutions on a day-to-day basis. But really, the workflow went very quickly, and we got into it very quickly. And the other thing was, you know, when new, you know, we had people coming on that we were sort of teaching the methods to, people were able to learn it very quickly. So I think, you know, if you had volunteer labor or sort of not highly trained labor, I mean, it's not a, you know, a huge process to train people up to speed on it. So the next video we're going to watch here is some of our crew talking about, giving us a little intro and talking about, this is their experiences kind of coming on, also sort of just, you know, fresh to this material and working with it. That'll be featuring Melissa and Kieran, some of our crew. And we'll throw that over this.
Village Carpentry for 20 plus years, and I've worked with them for about a year and a half, almost 2 years now.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I'm currently living in West Stockbridge, Mass. Grew up in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, so I'm pretty used to this area. I found out about Village Carpentry last year and just started working for the company about a couple months ago. And it was exciting because the crew was still in the process of learning, and I was too, so I could connect on that level. So that's kind of where I stepped in and was able to learn along with the crew and find a flow alongside them, and was pretty impressed at how quickly we got into a really nice flow working with the material. See, so we had Kieran mainly doing the mixing, although he plugged into shuttering, packing, and lifting the buckets like anywhere where we needed it, and he was available. We had Winter, who was Winter and Josh were both kind of the minds behind setting up shuttering and like the cuts needed for that, and like fabricating that. Both Winter and Josh, Winter a little bit more was focused on keeping the eye and notes on the material, as well as Kieran, and like troubleshooting that. And then I was helping with putting the shuttering up, taking it down, leveling it and all of that, as well as moving the material and packing it. So we all kind of shared roles, and then all of us were maybe a little bit more focused on one element.
I ran the skid steer, which has a special mixing bucket on it. So while everybody was busy doing either lifting shuttering or, you know, actually packing the hempcrete once we had done one mix, I would be off to the side, and I had to get the hemp, which we would do 2 bags of hemp, and I'd load it into the mixer, and get 2 bags of ICAT and load those into the mixers, and I also have to add the citric acid. That's something that I really focus on, is like, how much should I be mixing this to get it just right? And, you know, which direction even should I be spinning the blades of the mixer to, rather than just kind of tossing the stuff together? How do I fold in all of these, like, very dusty, very, very small particulates that'll just float away if you mix them too much? How do I fold them into the hempcrete, the actual hemp itself, to kind of thoroughly get all of the hemp coated in these, you know, elements that need to be evenly distributed, so that when you add the water, the chemical reaction is also evenly distributed throughout the whole material.
While we were mixing the hempcrete, it was very important to take into account any inconsistency in the environment around us and the materials that we were mixing with. On hotter days, we had to use more water, and some days that were higher in humidity, we actually had to use less water in order to achieve a consistent mix. We also had to take into account the consistency of the hemp itself.
And it didn't take long. I think, you know, after the first day, even after the first like 3 bags, we had a really good system going, and it just got faster from there.
Packing, we would be kind of in a line along one form, and we would kind of be aware of the level or depth that each of us were working at, so that Winter down on one end wasn't like really high up than myself on another end, but that we would like, if Winter was at the starting to move forward part of the form, then he would be like sloping down to the next one and meeting the top of the next one. So then I would be like filling in the top layer of that form, and that way we would be creating like a nice even layer. After, I would say, a week, we all were in a really good flow with each other and worked really efficiently, and could see that we were getting more mixes in, more pours in one day. And that was exciting to see, and I felt good just in my own self, being able to see myself understand the hempcrete more, how to pack it, what to look out for. So it was a very informative experience where I was learning like every day how to, you know, improve my pace and just like viscerally, tangibly like understand the process.
An eye-opener to realize, like, oh, this is like almost every inch of this entire house is touched by somebody's hand, like literally has somebody's handprints in it. The one area that I packed the most in was definitely right at the top. That was the most difficult area as far as I could see. Because that's the time I spent the most outside of the machine. That's where the most bodies were needed, and that's one of those elements of kind of forecasting, you know, every movement that you do in relation to the next. And the reason it was so difficult is because the roof had been put on, which is something that is difficult to work around, because you always have to have a roof on your house in order to protect your building materials. But when you get right up against it, it's very difficult to get your arm into the shuttering and pack it right up to the very edge of that form without having to actually remove a portion of your house.
All right, everybody, this is Tom Rossmaster picking up where these guys have left off. I'm going to restart the presentation. It's just a few more slides to get to the Q&A, and just going to run through a few things about how Hempstone dialed into this process. First was sort of the expertise and supply, and I know there was a question asked and answered, and not everyone may have seen it, but the hemp on the left of your screen is from through downright from the Netherlands as a waste product of the fiber industry. And just a correction on the mix, because when Kieran was talking, you talked about putting 2 bags in a Vicat, but the Vicat is the natural cement from France that was used, and it was used as a 50-50 blend with a local lime, and I'll show you those pictures in a second. So in general, you know, we rely on the consistency and the quality of the European-made hemp right now. We're working with others to try and move the American market along. And we also rely on European expertise. Alex Sparrow from UK Hempcrete, many of you know, is also integrally involved in the project with us as consulting. In terms of testing, we started in January. It's supposed to be a really early build, and things got backed up a little bit due to weather. Things got backed up due to COVID, but we did a test panel. The crew from Village Carpentry and Landscaping put together a timber frame panel that we're going to test on and do some mixes. We also tested different ways of forming and releasing the forms, and that was another way we could sort of trial and experiment. And in general, in terms of the mix, past that, you know, because it was such an early build in the year, we wanted to make sure, one, that the binder was going to set even during the cold temperatures. We didn't end up actually building in, you know, February, March. We ended up starting in May. So Village Carpentry, due to, again, COVID and other aspects related to some of their subs, started later. but this was the general mix, and we stuck with that mix. The Lee lime, which is 50 miles away from the project, which was half the binder mix, which is a type S, not official type S, but basically a type S type lime, was mixed with the Vicat on the far left. And depending on temperature of the material in the mix and the exterior temperatures, there was varying amounts of citric acid, which is shown in the middle, added to just temper the set so that there was enough working time for the crew. And then right before the project started, as Winter mentioned, there was some test boxes made to just get people used to the idea of the right amount of packing. And some of those test boxes later, you can see in the bottom middle, that was a palm sander, just seeing what it would be like to kind of round over an edge, maybe for a window or things like that. And some tamping tools that were made to kind of get the sense of how much pressure and how much square inches of pressure you need in different areas to try and pack the material properly. We also work with Village Carpentry subcontractors on the electrical, for example. Obviously a mass wall was kind of new to them in terms of how the electrical codes were interpreted. The Winter and others have mentioned about having to shutter around the electrical boxes, and Shelby mentioned it too. The bottom right, you can see the electrical boxes were left proud because the electrical code interpretation was that no interruptions should be made. They didn't want extender boxes. That made it much more complicated for the shuttering, the formwork, as those had to be accommodated in the formwork to accommodate the finished plaster, which was where those boxes were left proud to. And the other thing would be just air tightness details is where Hempstone kind of dialed in as well. The crew in general was just amazing in terms of how quickly they took to packing and figuring out the material, and also working in the dirty places, which is on this frame around all the little timber frame nooks and crannies around under beams and things like that, as well as along the top, as Kieran was mentioning, along the roof, which is a difficult area to work in. And so, we've been helping with the air tightness details where the lime plaster air tightness barrier is going to meet up with the Intello, in this case, in the top of the roof, but also around the windows, doors, and coming up with tapes that aren't typically used in the United States, but are available in Europe that can be plastered, and the plaster will stick to around some of these key air tightness detail areas. We're also been conducting moisture readings around the building at different areas and at different heights to try and determine how quickly the building's drying out. We've had, based on the roughly 11-inch thick walls, an estimated dry time of 5 to 6 weeks. We've had some humidity and a little bit of wet summer here and there, dry lately. But so it's been a little slower. We've used this Delmerst B2100 meter with different probes that can go all the way 6 inches halfway into the wall, but we're typically measuring it 1.5 inches to 3 inches from both sides. And some of the areas are getting low enough to be plastered, but not enough yet. And so once we get that to a spot around 25% or less, we're giving the Village Carpentry crew the green light to go ahead and commence with plastering. And of course, they're fitting out the interior and finishing some other things in the meantime. So I'm gonna turn it back over now to just a panelized discussion and a Q&A. We're gonna go through some lessons learned from the crew. Before I get to that, let me just talk about experimentation with the lime and the plaster. So, both companies are very committed to use of local materials. So we have the Lee lime in the plaster. This is 50 miles away. Unfortunately, our local lime kiln had some problems, and we're no longer able to source that locally, which both companies really like. So the local lime, which is the Lee lime, meets the Type S. It's very high in magnesium. It's not technically, they didn't maintain their certification, but it's basically a Type S lime. And we've tested for body or fatness through different time frames and using different ratios and time frames over 1 to 7 days, different mixes. We've also tested for both the base and the finish coats, and the plaster test mix, as you can see on the right, had been applied to the original Hempcrete test wall panel on the left, to exposed to weather to kind of determine how well they're adhering. and how well they're looking. Fundamentally at Hempstone, our role is to just guide, empower, and support these construction crews. And I would say that Village Carpentry and Landscaping took to this really well, despite really complicated details around the timber frame. It took them 4 weeks to cast the walls. They probably could have done it in 2 weeks now that they're experienced if it was a conventionally framed building, just stick frame. Our broad goal at Hempstone is just to help the industry broadly adopt hempcrete, no matter what your role or what you build. So feel free to reach out to both Village Carpentry and Landscaping at the bottom left here, as well as Hempstone. Having experienced people in your back pocket helps immensely. Just not make the same mistakes twice. And it's not to say that this project or any other project hasn't had mistakes, but they're all fixable with hempcrete, which is great. So there's been some patching here and there, but the project fundamentally has gone off very well, and we're all very proud of it. I'm gonna, leave you with this. We'll put some additional chat in the chat box, some of our contact information. And now with each team member coming back online from the video, I'm gonna exit this portion of the presentation, and we'll all get into just a few lessons learned, and then get more fully into the Q&A portion at the end of this presentation here. All right, so everybody's coming back online and on video and unmuted. And Jennifer, you want to take back over in terms of host and the reins?
Sure, thanks, Tom, I appreciate that. All right, I would love to have Village Carpentry and Landscaping start with perhaps a summary of the lessons learned that Kieran and Melissa and Josh experienced and shared with y'all. And then I'd love to hear from each of you, Winter and Shelby, about specific key takeaways that you had after designing and building with Hempcrete.
Well, so one of the things that the big lessons that we learned, I mean, I think in a lot of this was obviously sort of refining the mix and refining our, water was a big one. I mean, that was sort of the one we still to this day keep sort of rehashing and talking about, thinking about sort of the water quantity, but also, things like how to pack under specific tight areas. One of the pictures that we showed back in one of the videos there, I'm sure, we can come up with something, you'll find something, but it's getting under the windowsills, which if we had a buck that was, if you build a windowsill buck, it's completely blocked off and it's hard to get underneath that sill. And so we actually cut out sections of the sill and left only framing where we needed, where the studs were. And so that's the kind of situation where it's like when we built the frame kind of like we expected to do, but even once we got into it, there was situations where we had to cut out a section of stud or cut out a section of sill. And so that's sort of one of those, pre-design situations where thinking about how do you get your hand in? I mean, that's really this thing is like everywhere you're putting hemp, you've got to put your hand or a tool or something. And so just keeping that in mind when you're framing the rough frame. And then of course, that comes into that sort of air tightness and, other exterior joints and all this stuff where it's sort of, whenever you are going to be making a joint or making a connection, you have to take into consideration what is the way that the hemp is going to be interacting with it, and the form specifically also is going to be interacting with that. You're going to have to do a lot of custom form work. Are you going to have to do, pack from the other side later, do sort of a patch pack as we had to do under like some brace work where it was just too tight to fit our hand and that kind of thing. So that's, those are definitely some lessons that, me as a designer, I'll definitely be considering for future builds is, how to either simplify things or, create access in complicated, challenging areas.
Thanks.
And as a Winter, you probably have something to say on that too.
Sure, yeah, I mean, definitely learned a lot about packing. I mean, the timber frame added a lot of complication in terms of the packing, but I mean, it just meant that you had to get your hands in all those nooks and crannies. And I loved one thing that Kieran said at some point during this was like, someone's hands has been on every part of this house. Like every piece, inside and outside, all the walls, someone's had their hands on all of it. So it's, you know, it's cool that you got in there. But I mean, we definitely learned a lot about the moisture content was one of the things that I focused on a lot from my day-to-day perspective of like working with it. We were just discovering, you know, working in the hot, sunny days is like you just had to add a little more water, and of course you don't want to add too much because it might extend dry time. But really, you know, getting someone on site and having someone who kind of has a sense, because you're just picking it up and testing it, packing it to see like, is this the right moisture content? But you know, we just learned, you know, I learned a lot about what I was looking for in a moisture content, because it, you know, when it was mixed too dry, we could tell it didn't pack very well. And so then it was like, all right, well, let's add a little more water to this mix. But that was, and then, you know, and then of course the learning, you know, the shuttering, you know, getting the shuttering around all the braces and everything. You know, we came up with a pretty good solution to that, which is just Timlock's big screws that's just from the outside all the way into the studs, and then you're able to, you know, tighten and loosen those to make sure that their forms are perfectly level. And it, you know, it was a pretty, yeah, it worked out pretty well.
Excellent, thank you. I just, I wanted to add a few pieces that Kieran and Melissa shared with me when I interviewed them. Kieran spoke a lot about precision in the formwork, because the formwork creates the actual shape of the hempcrete walls. And so the extra attention that is paid as you're tightening your screws into your formwork to get it exactly plumb and level and an exact precise distance pays off in the actual wall that you see going forward. And Melissa spoke a lot about the value of having really clear, good communication. She specifically attributed it to being a small crew. I believe there were 4 of you that were packing and working together. And she was saying that you could really understand what was happening throughout the day as the temperature warmed up, as you moved to areas that were in shade or sun, by just communicating. This feels a little dry, it feels a little wet, we need to make sure that it stays in the shade. And that open communication channel between your small group really was effective at making sure that your mix stayed moist enough, but not too moist as you went up the building. Excellent. So I'm curious, turning it over to Hempstone's side, I'm curious, what were your big takeaways?
This is Tom. I'll just say broadly that, you know, having a crew that had not been through a workshop prior, although Shelby had been to Idaho and has been researching it for a really long time, and through the USHBF, was really, you know, we've been a part of a build in Vermont, the first house in Vermont, and that was a primarily volunteer crew. And I will say, to Winter's point, you know, with good managers like they have, teaching the new people coming on the job, you know, and getting them with the program as to sort of everybody mixing and packing the same kind of consistency is important. That was a problem a little bit in Vermont with volunteer, like workshopping it. But they did a very good job getting up to speed quickly on that. That was you know, I could see with another crew that wasn't willing to really, it's labor intensive to really, and these are carpenters, no offense to carpenters, but they're used to doing it all anyway. It's a, you know, it's a small shop, and they do timber, they do everything. So they're not afraid of hard work, but it's a very labor intensive process, and they weren't afraid to, like I said, go do what they needed to do, touch every part of the building and pack it where they needed to. And so the pre, there's no substitute, and this is basically a design build by Shelby and his crew. So there's no substitute for all the pre-planning and thinking that goes through, especially that's what a design build is supposed to do, is save you time and energy around the actual implementation, even though this was a new technology in some ways to them. But yeah, that lesson learned is like, you can't do enough upfront. There's no shortage of upfront thinking on this, to think out through the details.
Thank you, Tom. Excellent. And I will add that we've talked a lot about moisture, and specifically the nuance, even the nuance between a morning, somewhat shady mixture and an afternoon sunny mixture is significantly different. And so when we were testing these materials, whether we were testing outside when it was 28 degrees or inside our shop and studio, the proportions in terms of how much water was needed would vary from what was needed and what they found on site. And so there was a real nuance about understanding the material, getting a real feel for it. And so what I would recommend for someone that's doing Hempcrete for the very first time is build test forms, build small test walls, experience what it's like to mix and feel that material, then let it dry. See how the material dries compared to how it looked when it was wet. Document that, pay attention. Either that or confer with someone who's been around the block and done a lot of Hempcrete, because it's a very experiential material. It does take a little bit of just getting yourself used to it. And then once you understand the moisture content, it's actually a very simple material. Melissa was saying she was surprised at how easy it was to orient, and how even Kieran was saying by the end of the first day, we really had it. And they were able to adapt to a new material very quickly and feel really comfortable with it. And one of the things that I observed coming in from an outsider's perspective and observing, it was a very peaceful scene. Everyone was able to talk to each other. There was music playing in the background. It was jovial. It was very human scale and a pleasant site experience to be on. That was key. Well, I think we are now at the point where we get to shift to Q&A. And so my role is simply to communicate the different questions that have come up and offer Tom, Shelby, and Winter the opportunity to address them. And so first and foremost, I want to back up a little bit to the building inspector, because this is a potential roadblock that anyone who's looking to build a code compliant house is going to have. And Shelby, you spoke a little bit about that you didn't have many challenges. We also wrote in our answer that there were their focus was mostly on knowing that there was enough structure and that was addressed through the engineering drawings. But I'd like for you to just paint us a picture of what it was like talking to the building inspector, what the attitude was, what you learned in that process.
Yeah, sure. So we went through 3 building inspectors in the course of starting this project, actually, because the town was actually one was retiring, and then we had an interim, and then they finally hired a new one. And so just in this one single project, I can sort of talk to sort of my experience with 3 different building inspectors all looking at the same project. And one of them, the first one, who was the one who was retiring, he was sort of giving me a hard time about a bunch of the projects, you know, the timber frame, the this, that, and the other thing. And he was just one of these guys. I'd heard lots of complaints about him from other builders in the area. He was one of those types of building inspectors. And I know that many of you are probably going to run into that character. You know, he was like, well, what's the manufacturer's specs? And of course, my answer is, well, I'm the manufacturer, because I'm taking raw materials, I'm putting them together on site, and I'm putting it into the building. And he continued to reiterate to me, but what are the manufacturer's specs? And of course, when you run into a building inspector like that, it's gonna be hard to sort of get anywhere, unless you maybe get hire an engineer or hire an architect to basically sign off and put their liability over the building inspectors. And that's really what, you know, when you're doing alternative builds, that's really one of the easiest ways to do something about that. But on the other hand, the other 2 building inspectors I worked with, both of them, the response was, wow, this looks really cool. Oh, look, you have engineering, you know, stamp on your timber frame. That makes my job easy, you know. And so it was sort of, you know, I mean, you get that perspective, but 2 out of 3 who both thought, hey, you showed me a piece of paper that has all the specs from these studies and you have an engineer stamp on your structure. Great. And I think that's just one of those, you're going to, win some battles, lose some battles. But I think so long as you're courteous and cautious and you've got some engineering, for certain things that you feel like, and you've got your paperwork, I had the whole binder on all of this stuff ready to go. That's going to make your life the simplest.
Excellent. Thank you. So the next question is from Liam, and he's curious to find out more about our moisture testing process, and is also curious to hear more about the humidity and temperature conditions during the build as well as since the build. And so I was hoping that maybe Winter and Tom could address those two elements of that question.
Winter, you want to go first and just talk about what the site conditions were?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we ended up, so it ended up being quite hot and sunny when we were actually mixing and pouring, and we just found that in those conditions it was like the more water the better, up to a point, but there was a lot of little things like we'd mix in the mixer and poured into bins as we're moving it around the site, and if those bins were left in the sun, if you put them in the sun and you go to pack, they would dry out very quickly. So it ended up being like covering them with a sack or putting them in the shade, gave us an extra 15 minutes of working time or so with the material. And being you can tell, like as you pour into the formwork and start to pack, you get a sense, and it's pretty obvious when it's too dry to pack, because it's almost like packing a dry material. It just kind of bounces back. It doesn't really compress. And when when it's really wet, you kind of pack it down and it gets pretty hard. It's almost like a Rice Krispie treat or something. And like, you can make a nice pack. But as for the dry time, that moisture content, maybe Tom, you can speak more to that.
Yeah, I guess too, the other part of that question is at what point after the set did we start taking moisture readings? And the entire thing started in late May and ended in late June. And 4 weeks roughly. We didn't start taking measurements till they were entirely done, really, at the end. And of course, the very first courses of shuttering were the ones that were going to dry out first. The ones in the south side are going to dry out on the outside first. So there's a sort of range depending on where it is in the height of the building, as well as what the orientation of the building is in terms of exposure to wind as well as sun. And this is not rocket science. That's been typical of all the buildings that we've done. We looked at, which is the northwest corner is the slowest to dry out, and in this particular building there's a hidden corner back that it's not only in the worst orientation, it's also kind of a little niche nook interior corner from the outside. So that it's been we're not even bothering testing the top of the building because it was only done finished a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever now. So but obviously as the bottom begins to dry out, we'll continue to search to test higher in the building as we go. You're muted, Jennifer, just so you know.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, so our next question is about, we talked about electrical lines in our exterior walls, and in this project we chose to keep plumbing out of the exterior walls. If that's not an option, is that possible? And if so, how would one design and build around plumbing?
I guess I'll answer this one. I would say you design and build around it the same way that you would in sort of a normal house to a certain extent, which is try to avoid it, because anytime you put water on an exterior wall, you're just running the risk of potential freezing, and you want as much insulation on the outside as possible. But also you want to make sure that you're letting the heat of the house get to those lines so that they're not only getting the energy from the exterior air, they're getting energy from the interior air. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to keep those wet lines, especially. A drain line's not a big deal. Drain lines can be in the exterior walls. But at that point, it becomes a complication of thickness and how much space it's taking up in the wall. I did my walls. They were designed to be 10.5. They really ended up closer to around 11. And if you just sort of take that into consideration, if you're trying to do an 1.5 inch drain line, yeah, it's probably not that big a deal. You know, you just want to make sure that you've got at least 2 inches thick of hempcrete on any side of any one thing whenever possible, so it has its own structural integrity. So, you know, your 1.5-inch line is going to be pretty close to the inside. It's not that big a deal. Wet line, kind of a similar idea. You probably have enough insulation on the outside that you're not in a lot of risk. But, you know, if you do a really thick wall, 14, 16, 18 thick wall or something like that, of course, there's no problem putting those lines in and you've got plenty of room to build with. But if you go down to a 9-inch thick wall, which some people recommend for hempcrete, now, once again, you try to put in a 3-inch drain line. Now you have almost no hemp in that one area. So structurally and insulation wise, it's a problem. So, you know, just like with electrical, and actually I saw another question earlier about electrical that I'll just answer now too, which is about if there was no exposed line in any of the hempcrete, what you saw was flexible conduit, which is it's still a concrete rated. So it's rated for, you know, in use in Portland cement. And that the thing about that was kind of nice was that the way it connected to the boxes, it actually had a screw fitting. So it went together pretty well, and it allowed us to go around some complicated framing, but also with that flexibility, it also meant that we could move the hemp, you know, move it, pack some hemp under it, push it down to the hemp, then pack some hemp over it, which made the packing go pretty well. So, you know.
Excellent.
Yep.
Thank you. There was a question about total project time, and I think it's really truly a 2-part question. One is how long does it take? And then embedded in that is really a sequencing question. And so I'd like to have each of you talk about as you're building, what was the project time? And then also as it's drying, because that's part of this process, what are you doing in the interim to continue moving your project forward? And how did you sequence the project overall, knowing that this was going to be a part of the project so that you could keep moving forward?
I guess that's me again. So timing. I mean, you know, any custom build house is somewhat of a challenge in sort of estimating true timing. I was hoping for about a 7 months build on this, but as I'm sure everybody in this world is aware, timing is has been a bit of a hassle this spring. So we were not terribly off schedule for basically a 7 months build. It's probably going to end up being more like a 9-month build at this point. There was obviously starting in the winter is always going to cause potential delays, which I knew that was part of the case. So, you know, and the hemp itself, I mean, I think really this question sort of pertains to how does hemp treat this problem of timing? And I would say it's really doesn't really change anything that much. I mean, a lot of the delays I've had have been around the foundation or around getting the electricians on site when I wanted them. You know, they were 2 weeks behind. So obviously we couldn't start hemp until the electricians had put in their thing and so on and so forth. And so, you know, when we went to actually do the hemp, I mean, it takes up the place of sheathing and of insulation work. So, you know, maybe it took a little longer, but it might change, and it might change the timing of the plaster work for the exterior and all that stuff. But all in all, you know, I don't think it sort of adds a huge amount of time. The one thing consideration is this dry time, which was sort of discussed before. It has to be taken into account. In this case, we're still working, we're still getting subs in. We still have rough electrical, rough plumbing, you know, we still have insulation to do. We can start working on some, you know, interior. There's lots of air sealing details, windows, doors, all that stuff. So, you know, people sort of expect about we talk about 6 weeks dry time from finish. There's probably at least 4 weeks minimum of all those other things going on. So once again, you know, maybe it adds a little bit of time here and there. And then of course that'll depend on your local site conditions. But yeah, I may add a little bit of total overall build time, but I don't think it's drastic extension of standard custom. I mean, custom homes, people expect them to last a year half the time anyways. So, you know, if you're looking at that time frame, the fact that it has to dry is not the big picture.
Excellent, thank you. I appreciate that. I noticed that we're coming up on our hour, and so I just wanted to give the US Hemp Building Foundation a chance to check in.
Hey, Jennifer.
Awesome.
It's your call if you think you'd like to continue the discussion.
Well, we still have a few outstanding questions, so
Okay.
we could probably go for another 10 minutes if folks are able to stay online.
Sure,
Sure.
that sounds great.
Excellent. All right, thanks everyone. So there's been a couple questions about, there's a clarifying question. There's attendee who's seeing this as a home-built project rather than a contractor-built project. And so I just wanted to clarify from Village Carpentry that this is, you're seeing this not as, other than the fact that you're your own client, this is a standard construction. You're still employing your whole crew. You're still paying them labor wages. You're still interfacing with your professional trade organizations in the same way that you would with any other project that you were doing, no matter the client, correct?
Yeah, right. And obviously, you know, my direct cost is just my payroll cost. I'm not paying standard full bill to client, you know, there's not the profit and overhead sort of parts of your standard contractor's fee and all of that. But what I have been doing is I'm doing my tally for the job as I would any other job, and I'm keeping track of it as close as I can to a standard build. I did my estimate, assuming that I was paying full wage. I even included my contractor's fee in my initial estimate when I was talking to the bank. And so really this whole project has been, for me as a future potential contractor building Hempcrete homes, it's all an experience, all a test economically as well as structurally about how this material interfaces with the building trade. And so, you know, specifically looking at the question there, it's how does labor budget fit into this? And obviously this is a high labor, low material equation compared to something more like like a zip system building style, where you're going to pay a lot for material compared to labor, or you're going to bring in cranes or equipment. And that's sort of going back to what I had sort of briefly mentioned before. The end product, actually, if you sort of take into account a standard construction that's going to have spray foams and expensive, you know, zip system, exterior weather barriers, way more tape than we are currently using, all those things that come into play with more conventional building methods. Yeah, you're going to pay workers more, but you're going to pay for less material. And in the end, when it comes to sort of local economics, one of my philosophies has always been, if my workers are getting paid, then that goes into my economy. If it goes to a big, corporation building, 1 million sheets of plywood every day in that one province in that one part of Canada, well, then all the money is going to that one corporation rather than actually, being used for my local restaurants and stores. So
Got it. Thank you.
Having to go towards labor rather than materials.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And so a follow-up question is, what does cost competitive mean? Can you clarify that a little bit more for us? The specific question is from Dion asking, is it a 5, 10, 20% difference compared to conventional, or is it pretty spot on?
So I did a calculation a bit ago for a client based on the numbers that we had developed after this project on, not sort of what obviously this project cost, but sort of what I knew we could get to now that we know what we're doing. And I was comparing no kitchen bath, this was just a shell, basically. It was a barn project, workshop. And so we were looking at a 2x6 zip system taped, weather barriered, cellulose insulated, really just basic run of the mill, R20, no thermal benefits at all, building to a 10-inch thick hempcrete wall, which is approximately also R20, but thermal barriers, all these other things, and moisture, management is different. So it's sort of this problem. So, and that ended up about 3% more expensive on the estimate, but definitely better thermal properties. So that's one of the other complications about thinking about cost comparative is, well, you're comparing this to, if you're comparing this to complete conventional, it's 3, maybe 5% more expensive, but you're getting maybe 10 to 12% more performance value out of it. So, if you looked at the same product, which I haven't yet done an exact comparison of, say, a high performance style build with a lot more, more insulation, maybe a double stud wall, or something like that. I actually think that the double stud wall would end up being more expensive by matching hers rating, performance values over the Hempcrete.
Excellent, thank you. And one more question about code compliance. There was a question from Stephen about wind loading. Did that come up between you and your inspector? And if so, how was that addressed?
Yeah, so I did see that question about wind shear. Yeah, the wind shear. So I sent my timber frame plans along with my truss plans over to my structural engineer, and he also took into account the structural information that we had collated, that HempStone had collated for me in research papers from Europe, and the engineer put those numbers in with the timber frame and the trusses, and he actually and he approved the wind shear math. He actually let me reduce the amount of braces in the timber frame on account of the Hempcrete, which helped save a little bit of cost and money and sort of helped simplify some design considerations. So, obviously the hemp is not doing 100% of the work. The trusses and the timber frame are calculated to take some of that load, but according to what numbers we were able to sort of pull up and present to the engineer that he approved, he was able to make use of the Hempcrete as part of the shear load for the house.
Excellent, thank you. It is my understanding that we are at the end of close to the end of our 10 minutes, and I wanted to give the US Hemp Building Foundation a moment to close. So thank you everyone for your amazing questions. There were a few that are outstanding. I will answer those through typing as we close the event. And if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to HempStone or Village Carpentry and Landscaping. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, HempStone and Village Carpentry, for partnering with us on this first USHBF event. Excellent information, very professional information that will be useful to all of our people interested in engaging in hempcrete construction. And we look forward to working with you in the future. The USHBF, as I said in the beginning, was developed to support the overarching goals of the USHBA. You can learn more about the USHBA at our website, ushba.org. Our mission on the USHBA is to support and advocate for building hempcrete building professionals, projects, and materials across the US. And we do have an enormous amount of resources across the entire supply chain for all of our members to access in order to facilitate anything, again, along the entire supply chain that you need help with or assistance with or connections to in order to engage in hempcrete construction and help build the industry. So please check out our website, and we do have membership information on the website. If you have any questions or want to talk more about USHBA membership, you can reach out to either Saba or I at info@ushba.org. As for the US Hemp Building Foundation, our focus is on education and fundraising, which we will be, so please watch your email going forward for future educational events and fundraising campaigns, which will be focused on facilitating the implementation of the building codes so that the building inspectors do have a code to work with, which will not only support much more effective projects on a residential and agricultural zone base, but also enable us to move into commercial construction and scale up the industry. So we will be launching some fundraising campaigns on the USHBF side of the organization in the coming weeks. We encourage you to pledge any donations that you would like to make to the USHBF in that regard by reaching out to us at info@ushbf.org. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And we are very excited on the USHBF team is very excited about all of the programming that we have in development, and as well as all of the programming that we have on the USHBA. So please reach out. We would love to talk to you and have you join the movement.
Thank you, everybody.